Hello, everyone. It is that Weems guy, and we are returning from a 2-week hiatus, and we will discuss the reason for that, hopefully briefly. But before we get started with that, I do have to caution you that we are being powered by Jackery tonight. We have severe weather in my area that has knocked out the power, and thankfully I had a Jackery power station fully charged. My laptop was fully charged, etc. But we are working on the internet connection that my phone provides, the hotspot instead of my home Wi-Fi. And so if we get any kind of sluggishness in the internet or whatever, that is the reason for that. And if all of a sudden everything goes dark and we disappear, I ran out of power. We have kind of a different format tonight. Steve Havey, the Magnificent Steve, will be taking over as a host in just a moment. And the panel will be myself and Karl Rehn. Initially had to put out forth another topic and didn't get the responses I felt we needed to get that. So I opened it up in the That Weems Guy Facebook group. Hey, just submit some questions and we'll answer them. Well, some of the questions that came in probably could be better answered by someone who deals with a different audience than I normally deal with in classes. And thankfully, Karl Rehn saw that as well. And he messaged like, hey, I can jump in and help with some of that. So Karl will be here to deal with some of those questions as well. But Steve will take over and be asking them. Now, as the reason for the 2-week hiatus, and Steve just all of a sudden may take over and start running. I lost my father this past week, and it's been hard. My family was in the dairy business for years and years and years, and my grandfather was killed in the barn by a cow, and the family had to continue on and keep milking. My uncle actually had to take his father's body, drive it to meet the ambulance, then come back and help come back and finish milking the cows. And that's just the way we've always looked at life. My father came home from the hospital 2-3 weeks. Days all the times running together. Several weeks ago on hospice, and they said probably a matter of months. And after he got home, my mother told me that she didn't think it was going to be that long. So I started canceling some things that were further out than last week. And we thought I was going to be good to go. I had a class that I was scheduled to take as a student. And everybody thought it was going to be okay, that I could go do the class and it wouldn't coincide with what we knew was coming. An hour before he passed, the hospice staff told my family, oh, we think probably several days that were within that time frame, but 2 to 3 days, which would have put us into the weekend. And my sister is sending me those, and I'm going to lose all neck cover that I've got for family at this point. My sister texted me and said, oh, they just said 2 to 3 days, you're good, stay and finish what you're doing. You know what he would want you to do. And an hour later, my phone rang, and that was the thing. They were going to text with anything, but then they were going to call if there was a change. And my phone rang, and she told me that he just all of a sudden went peacefully. And I may lose it here. She said, there's nothing you can do. You can't change anything. And you know what he would expect you to do. And I thought about it for a few minutes. I said, he would expect me to finish milking my cows. She said, you're right. That's what you need to do. So I stayed and I finished the class. And it was hard. I want to thank the host of the class. They provided me an office to go have some alone time to talk with my family. And a couple of times I just had to step off the line, but I finished it. And then we came home and I got to see him, and we did a memorial service on Sunday. We did a private family only burial on Tuesday. He is in If I may back up for a second, he was 86. He died approximately 100 feet from the spot where he was born. Um, on land that his parents got from my grandmother's great uncle. We buried him on Tuesday in a cemetery next to his parents. His great grandparents are in the cemetery. He had a first cousin that they were 3 months apart in age, and they were like brothers, just as close as could be. He's there, and numerous other cousins and the like. And yeah, this is something we all face. And in 1986, the doctors told us that he might live another 10 years. 1986. I was a 14-year-old boy. And he told me, he said, nah. He said, I never knew my grandpa and you never knew yours on his side, on his father's side. And he said, I will live long enough to have a relationship with each of my grandchildren. And his youngest grandchild is 14. And he made it, to have that relationship with each of his grandchildren. And that was what he said he was going to do. And then just the last thing I'll say on this before we move on, the next to the last thing I'll say on this before we move on. There near the end, he told my mother that he could see his mother and aunt in the room. And then he got upset and she's like, why are you upset? And he said, they're wearing barn clothes and I don't want to get to heaven and have to milk cows. And every time I start to get choked up, I think of that and it just makes me laugh. And I get through it. I'm the youngest of my siblings, and the only advantage to having an older brother that I can ever discern out of this entire 50-something year relationship was that he pestered my father into taking him out to shoot a gun. And I got to tag along. I was 6 years old. And my daddy looked over there and said, all right, come here. And he helped me hold up a high standard Flight King and 20 gauge, which was labeled as a Sears Ted Williams private label gun. And I fired my first shot out of that gun and I was hooked. And that's what kind of, set the stage for the rest of my life. And he was my first firearms instructor. And I brought that shotgun home the other day. Steve?
Okay. Well, how do I follow that? Other than to say, it's very clear how loved and your father was in his community. From the, I went to the service on Sunday, and that church was full. And it's a small town, and it was full of people that all loved your father, told great stories about your father. So, no surprise to me what a great man he is, knowing you as I do.
Thank you.
All right. So with that, we'll move on. And Karl, thanks for joining us tonight. We got a lot of questions about instructors on Facebook today. As Lee mentioned, it started in one direction, but then it quickly moved into another direction in terms of what tonight's theme is. I'll pretty much go down the questions in the order that they came in. So the first one is from our buddy with the Federal Bureau of Prisons up in the Federal Prison Bureau up in Terre Haute. How do you tactfully handle students or other instructors that have an ego beyond their abilities? And Karl, I'll let you go first.
Oh, great.
You think I'm going to ask Lee right away? No.
Right. The thing is, you've got to have more than a paper resume to decide if you're going to go spend your money and your time training with somebody. The wonderful thing is now with podcasts and YouTube videos and everything that you can check people out pretty well before you go. And if you're not doing your homework, then, shame on you for being surprised. And sometimes I'll be honest, sometimes I'll just go take a class from somebody because I want to see if the actual execution of the course lives up to the hype. And if you have that kind of money and time, and occasionally I do, that particularly if I'm going to decide if I'm going to host somebody at my facility, instead of bringing them in, I did that one time, gambled on someone that I didn't know very well, brought them in, and it didn't go well. And so now I don't bring people into my range unless I've gone and trained with them, or I really know them pretty well. I've seen them teach at TACCon, or I've seen them teach someplace else. And these conferences, the various ones, of course, TACCon, but also the concealedcarry.com people do, the Guardian Conference, and I think there's still the Shooter Symposium and a few other things that go on. That those are great opportunities to try before you buy, get a sample and say, well, okay, is this really all that? And so I think that's probably the best advice I can give you, because sometimes people that have big egos actually have skills to go along with that, and occasionally it's not completely an indicator that it's going to be a bad class. Someone that has a lot of confidence.
Okay. Lee, when you've got a student that thinks they're much better than they really are, and their ego is getting in their way, what do you do?
Well, first, that's going to have to depend on the setting. Are they a paying customer to my private business, or are they a law enforcement personnel that are in a government class? And of course, our friend asked the question tactfully, and I can confess that I haven't always handled it tactfully. Especially on the law enforcement side, it's a little bit different when I got a customer. Ultimately, at some point in time, if they can back up what their ego's telling them, well, there's not much you can do with them. Sometimes you can put them in a situation where it shows them that they are not as good as they thought they were. And you'll get, sometimes the response will be, well, okay, I'll buckle down and I'll pay attention and I'll try to learn. And then sometimes they just get more resistant. And I guess it's going to depend on how well they are to accepting things. I can think of one law enforcement student that I was getting ready to go to the academy, and he was not listening to the lessons that I was trying to teach. And ultimately, I finally just said, okay, I've tried to work on skills and you want to talk about the test, so let's go shoot the test. And he failed the test miserably. And I said, I tried to tell you, you wouldn't listen. And now you're going to report to another instructor, and maybe you'll listen to them when you wouldn't listen to me. And to that student's credit, he went to the other instructor and said, walked in his office, sat down at his desk and said, I need help. I'm in trouble. And the instructor, other guy, was like, okay, and went and he listened to him. And I actually ended up writing a letter of commendation for that guy. He has completely turned around his attitude in classes. And so I wrote his division commander. Yeah, attaboy. Yeah, he and I got off on the wrong foot. I couldn't get through to him. Someone else has. And now he's coming to classes with a completely different attitude, and he's learning and he's getting better. And that's a success story. So let's go with that one.
Okay. Karl, have you ever had to fire a student, and how do you go about doing it?
So what happens usually is I have assistants helping me teach. And it's usually not that students get fired. It's that we find out that they can't keep up with the class. And so, and I'm not picking on this young man, but he had a high point that he had brought to the class. And the high point guns just can't do what other guns can do. And basically what happened there is I handed the class to my assistants, and I went with him, and I took him on to raise and took him over to the other berm, and we had a private lesson, and we tried to figure out, okay, basically I had him shoot a different gun for a little bit, and then we transitioned back, and I had shot his gun for a little bit to prove to him it could be functioned, could do it. And by the end of maybe an hour, he was able to rejoin the class and finish up the class, but he still struggled, and it was pure equipment issues. Generally, I don't fire students as long as they're safe. If they're not learning and they're just there running the drills, then that's fine, right? And if all they want to get out of class is, okay, I'm on the line and I'm shooting the drills and I'm not disrupting the class, then that's fine. The only other way I'll fire a student is I did have one student that I sort of shadow banned because he would sign up for class and he was too disruptive in class. He was too political, and not in the way that you might think, but he was political. And I finally just said, I said, class is full. I would normally just say, oh, the last slot, somebody just got it. I'll put you on the wait list. And of course, but that's only been one student in like 30 something years.
And he eventually got the message.
He eventually lost interest, I think, in shooting.
I was going to say, one way you can fire a student is you can pawn him off your assistant you can pawn him off on your assistant instructor. Lee knows about how to do that.
Right. Right. Well, it depends on what you want to do to them. Like in the case of the young man with the high point, he had spent almost as much as he spent on the gun to come to our class. And I wanted to make sure that we, made him as successful as possible. But at the same time, he was flailing. He was really struggling to keep up with the group. And I was prepared to basically spend the rest of that 4-hour class teaching him individually, because I knew that my folks could teach the rest of the course just fine. And as it worked out, once we solved a few problems and he understood a few things, then, at the end of class, it was, well, you spent 150 on this high point. Look, here's a Taurus that's about $215, and you could shoot this gun so much better than the high point. And I flat out told him, I said, you should sell that high point and add another $50 to it. And the CZP-10 is on closeout. The Taurus G3s are cheap right now, and the little Steger little M&P Shield clone guns, they're as low as 140. I said, so you can get something for the same money and get a better gun. And he got it. He understood. So I considered it a win.
Mm-hmm. Do you carry spare rigs for people that just show up with something that won't run?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. I just taught a whole group of armed teachers and church security people, and we are religious about, if somebody's hasn't trained with us before, the very first thing we do is we meet them in the parking lot and we explain the rules of what we expect, like don't handle your gun in the parking lot. And we show them where the safe area is, and then we have assistants in the safe area, and we pretty much paw through all their gear and identify that this holster is not suitable, this holster doesn't sit right on your hip, you can't reach the trigger on that gun, and all of that. Because like a 4-hour class or even an 8-hour class, it's painful to watch somebody suffer. And so I'm very preemptive about, I've probably got 6 different complete setups of guns of various, everything from the EZ380 to M&Ps and Glocks. And now I'm going to keep this Taurus G3 that I've been working with, and I'm going to add it to my student arsenal of, going to get 4 magazines. I've got a holster for it, and it'll join the kit, because I would rather have them work with that than something else. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, the answer is yes. If you want to be good at teaching entry-level gateway kind of students, a good instructor needs to have gear, and not just because people don't know what they need until they get to class.
Exactly. So, Lee, what do you look for when you're considering classes that you might attend? Is it curriculum, instructor, location?
But before I get into that, may I address the previous question?
You may.
I'm amused when you ask if Karl had extra gear. Karl has an entire room full of extra gear, and it's been impressive. I was teaching at his place, and I had to screw back out of a mag pouch. And Karl's like pulls out all these boxes of stuff. There's one of those screws in here and everything. I was just amused by
That's what I did this morning. I had a student come out, and he had a We the People holster with a wing on it, and he had installed the wing wrong. And I had my box of holster parts, and I took the holster all apart and replaced some of the screws and parts for him, and got that holster to as good as it was going to be. And he was amazed, that I had literally a whole box of wings and claws and belt clips and belt struts and screws and washers and all that. But I've got more than 70 different loaner holsters now in my collection. And it's a lot of those were purchased very cheaply on instructor discount, dealer discount, donated by students. And I'm going to put in a plug real quick and then I'll hush. Comptac, COMPTAC, makes a product line called the Q Series. And the Q Series is designed to fit a wide variety of guns. And the Comptac Q Series, if you're trying to figure out as an instructor, what loaner gear should I have? If you buy some of those Q Series holsters, you can configure them as inside and outside, right hand, left hand, and they fit a bunch of gun models. And in terms of cost, that's your best value right there. And I've got a bunch of them.
And I had a pretty good idea that Karl had a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
I was asking that question. It was in the form of a question, but I was leading the witness, so to speak.
Right.
I remember one of the first classes that I assisted Lee with, I could see a holster wasn't going to work before they even drew. And I was on my way back from my truck with a replacement holster when the gun came out with the holster sitting on the end of it. So yeah, really, if you're an instructor and you don't have at least one full complete kit to replace for somebody, and Karl, you mentioned left-handed, a left-handed holster can come in real handy at times.
Screwdriver and some parts. The Comptac stuff, you can swap the belt clips from one side to the other. And if the students will tell you in advance that they're left-handed, I had a lady that wanted to carry appendix left-handed, told me what gun she had, and I was able to switch all the parts around. And when she got to class, it was like, here you go, here's your holster. So instructors, if you ask your students what gun and what hand and all that, sometimes you can not be surprised on class day and have everything ready for them.
The Safariland ProFit series is a good
absolutely
for that as well. As far as firing students, I have fired several. One was kind of a soft firing like Karl did. I just took his email address out of all of my stuff so that he wouldn't get the course announcements and the like. And thankfully he moved pretty quick thereafter. I had another student that I had only done private lessons for, and I don't do private lessons much anymore. And I just finally told him, like, look, I just don't think this is a good fit. I think you need to go see somebody else. And I have one that I flat out told, you are not allowed back at a class. Now, there had been the guy had taken classes years prior. Some stuff came out that he had not truthfully represented his background, and some certain scary people took exception to that. And so the guy kind of disappeared. And then a couple of years went by and he showed up in a couple of classes under a different name. It was like he showed up for one under a different name. I didn't realize it was him until I saw him. And then he signed up for another class, and I just refunded everything, said you're not welcome back. And just had to hard fire him. Steve, what was the question about what I was looking for?
What are your considerations when signing up for classes? Are you looking at the instructor, the curriculum? How do you select classes that you decide to go to now?
It's kind of multifaceted, and it's changed somewhat over the years. When I was new to the open enrollment circuit, was doing stuff more as a student than teaching or taking instructor classes. I tried to focus on people who had both an application background as well as a technical background, because my line of thinking there was they've learned how to solve the technical problems in an application setting. Guys like Eric Lund. So I focused on a lot of those classes. Todd Green had started Pistol Forum, and he had designated certain people with an SME tag, subject matter expert. I started looking into those people's backgrounds and looked for the common training that they had all taken. I said, if these guys are the acknowledged experts in the field, how did they become the acknowledged experts in the field? So I started trying to take the common classes that were listed in their backgrounds, as well as classes from them. And then thankfully, Tom Givens took me under his wing and he gave me a, a list of, you will go to this person, this person, this person, and this person. As I progressed and began to move more towards the instructor side of things, I started looking at specific subject matters. Like here lately, everything I've been taking has been dealing with teaching pistol mounted optics or other instructor development classes. And now also sometimes I will go take an entire class just because I want to see how a particular instructor addresses one specific thing, not necessarily their entire curriculum. It's like, is instructor Bob, I want to go see how he teaches ready positions. And I'm just pulling something out of thin air here. And I want to go see that. And I might not be there because I agree with everything else they teach, or I might disagree with stuff they teach in the class. But if I'm going for that one thing, I may come away with that. And it's just multifaceted of what I'm trying to get out of it. I also look at location. I'm getting older. I can't handle the 95-degree crazy humidity days, and so I look at where the classes are going to be, and
You
take
check
some of
out
that into
the
consideration.
location of barbecue restaurants?
I do plan routes based on barbecue joints and river crossings.
Okay. Karl, a question for you.
Well, can I answer Lee's question?
Sure, go right ahead.
Because I just did that. I just went and took a 2-day Red Dot instructor class from one of the big names in the Red Dot instructor class or Red Dot class world. And, he contacted me beforehand, which I thought was really astute. And he said, so why are you taking my class, right? Why are you coming to take my class? And I said, well, I get students that have trained with you. I get students that have watched your videos on YouTube and think they're doing what you're teaching. And I said, number one, I want to know what you actually teach so that if they're getting it wrong, I can fix it, right? And if I'm going to copy or use anything that you came up with, then I want to have honestly paid you for that information as opposed to gotten it third hand from somebody else. And that was interesting because there were several things that students that had watched his videos were doing wrong. They were not doing what he was teaching. They were doing what they saw other people doing. And so there was a few elements of his class that it was worth it to go get the material directly from that guy.
Mm-hmm.
And so now I can say, well, I learned it directly from him, and you're not doing it. You didn't quite get the message.
Right. He didn't teach them something. They weren't doing what he taught them to do, even though they thought they were.
Well, I'll be specific. It had to do with how far do you push your arms out. And this is a direct quote from what he said in class, is you push your arms out all the way and you unlock them a half an inch. And what I see is a lot of acolytes of him and some other trainers that do this. They're pulling their arms in like 25%.
Mm-hmm.
He's telling people 95% extension, and they're doing 75% extension. And that's because what they've seen, I guess, online. And
Right.
It's just one of those things. It's like, well, but that guy, the guy that you're claiming is the source for that, he doesn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
So now I feel like I'm standing on solid footing because I agree with what he teaches. And that's what I've been telling people. It's just for whatever reason, what people teach and what they hear sometimes doesn't link up.
Yeah, I once thought of, totally unrelated to your class and totally unrelated to that instructor. I once considered taking a class just to see if somebody was as bad as I'd heard he was. And I decided, no, I would take the word of the 14 people I knew that I trusted that told me you didn't want to spend any money there. And so I didn't spend any money there.
Right.
At what point, Karl, is it appropriate to ask an instructor for a refund?
Wow. I have never done that. There is one time in my training career that I wished I had. And that was a case where it was a bait and switch. We signed up for a class with a particular instructor. We got there and he was not there, and his assistants took over the course, and it was an expensive 3-day class at a remote location. And the class was extremely disappointing, and to the point that we discovered that we had been misled by the marketing. We had been told if you take the 3-day level 1, you can come back for level 2 later. And at the end of the class, we were told, oh no, not only can you not come back for level 2, but you have to retake the 5-day level 1, and which means you're repeating 3 days you already had at full price. So the only way you can advance in our program is you have to basically throw away the money you've spent and the time that you've spent and start over. And we didn't go back. And so that was kind of my version, but the older me probably would have asked for a refund and complained vociferously to the director of the training school about it, because it was the worst training experience I had in my entire 30-year, 3,000-hour history.
Lee, an opinion on that? And when you ask for a refund?
Like Karl, I've never asked an instructor for a refund, and I'm struggling to think of an instance in which that even became a fault. I suppose that if I were in a class and, there was unsafe stuff going to unsafe conditions on the range, students were being unsafe on those lines, I might say, hey, look, I'm out of here, and I would like a refund at that point, because I'm leaving because of these things. If it's because if I go and I just didn't like the class, or there was some other thing like that, then I wouldn't think of that. There would have to be some other reason for leaving. I was in a class one time where I contemplated having a workplace emergency. And having to leave, and I ended up sticking it out, and it all came together at a later point in the class, and I'm glad that I did not have the workplace emergency.
Yeah, it's a question, these questions are all coming in from folks that are asking them. And I was thinking about that one myself, well, and like so much in life, context is so important, right? Is this class not what you thought it was going to be? What's the reason why you're considering needing a refund? Is it unsafe? In which case, as I always tell my folks, in any of my classes, I tell them, if you're ever in a situation that you think is unsafe, bring it up. And if they don't address it, then feel free to leave. There's no amount of money that you got shot because you didn't want to walk away from a class you paid money for. That's not a good reason. So, but if everybody else seems to be getting something out of the class, and maybe the class isn't up to your expectations, but everybody else is getting something out of it, then maybe just, you made.
Well, the class I'm referring to, there were 13 people in our class that were overqualified for level 1, who had been told you can't take level 2 unless you take our level 1, and 2 people that needed NRA basic pistol 1 that literally didn't know what end of the gun to hang on to. And the assistant instructors taught the class down to the 2, leaving the 13 pretty much bored. And we were all, the whole draw of this was, we have this $1 million shoot house that you're going to get to go through. And they managed that so poorly. It was 4 hours of sitting around outside, going through one at a time, going to 2 rooms and shooting 1 target. And then on the 3rd day, instead of getting an additional shoot house run or any kind of more coaching, they ended class early. So we didn't even get 3 full training days.
Oh, Karl, I have no question or no
And
doubt that you know
was the
how to
case.
judge the class you were in.
Yeah.
That wasn't the point of my comment. My comment
Yeah.
was for somebody out there, as
Mhm.
if you're asking, gee, should I be getting a refund? What's the context? If you're the only unhappy person, then maybe you need to think about it. In your
I have
situation, you are not the only unhappy person. I can bet.
I have never been in a class where anybody asked for a refund. As an instructor, I've given a few refunds once or twice where often it was somebody that came to the class and they picked a class that was way below what they needed. And that was just an ethics thing for me. It's like, you didn't need this class and, you should come back for this other class. But generally, that's the only time I've done it, is if I really felt like I wasted somebody's time or I took their money and didn't give them anything of value, then occasionally, once every 3 or 4 years, I'll run into one of those. But I've gotten really good at making sure that I pair up the students with the appropriate classes and that they don't take basic 1 when they need, defensive 3.
Mm-hmm. And I know
I've had
Lee's got the one example where he showed up to teach I'll call it a level 4 class, and 90% of the students were level 1.
Right.
And it was so on the spot, Lee said, okay, 10% of you can have a refund. We're changing the direction of this course on the spot, which is something, the call he had to make at that time for that situation.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's what I was about to bring that up. I had several students that were qualified for the class that was advertised, and then several that weren't. And I went and told I said, look, I can't run the class that you signed up for, so I'm going to give you your money back. But I'd like you to stay for the day, but I'll give you your money back, and everything. And at the end of the day, all of those individuals came and said, no, we got something out of this class, keep the money.
Good.
So I ended up, yeah, very good. So I ended up not having to do any refunds on that. And actually, out of that experience, a completely new class was born. And it turns out that class is my best seller. So
Cool.
it turned out to be positive all the way around.
So we had a couple of questions about how do you choose an instructor, and what are the signs of instructors you should avoid. And Karl, I know you mentioned people can go online and do research about their instructors, et cetera. But can you give some examples? And we'll let Lee go first this time because I've been picking on Karl a little bit, making him go first every time. What are some things that you look for, or that others should look for when they're vetting instructors? And what are some of the warning signs of instructors you should stay away from?
Let me be very clear that I tend to take classes from the application side more so than the technical side. And I'm not panning technical type classes at all. I'll be flat up and say, if you're looking to increase your USPSA classification, I might can get you to a B, but go to somebody who's made it to Grandmaster to learn how to make it to Grandmaster. That's not me. With that said, if it is an application class and the focus is on metrics and not mindset, that is a big warning flag to me. Because in my opinion, people who tend to focus on the metrics of shooting are people who don't have actual application experience. And I know I just made a lot of people mad with that statement. I don't care. Some of that stuff matters. Obviously, a 1.5 second draw is better than a 2.25 second draw. I don't know that a 1.1 draw or the mythical sub 1 second draw is that much different than a 1.5 draw in an application setting. My friend Brian Eastrich wrote something recently, wrote a review of a class, and then he said, there was no range Pokemon, all this kind of stuff, and that has upset some people. And it's like, well, you're against having standards and having to shoot under pressure in classes. That's not what Brian said. But I think it does raise an interesting question. I just took an optics instructor class last week, and 4 of the 20 hours of the class were spent on shooting their standards. Quite frankly, I would have rather had 4 more hours of learning specifically about that particular manufacturer's mounting system and the like, or how to teach the dot versus shooting a test that I could pass when I walk through the door. So to me, that wasn't a big deal to pass those metrics in the class. Oh, but I shot under pressure and I made their highest level. Okay, I could make their highest level when I got there, when I wrote the check. So that's a big thing for me. I tend to look for as a red flag, and with the understanding that certain people on juries are going to be upset over anything firearms related. If an instructor has content that I just really don't want a jury to see and to be played, I actually gave a dispositions in a civil case today. That's somebody I'm not going to take classes from because I don't want them coming up in my trial. I have a vast respect for the United States military. And I don't care if you were a cook, truck mechanic, whatever. If you went through basic training, you did more than I did. Okay. But small unit tactics aren't pertinent to my life as a private person. And so all of that stuff, it may be cool to go spend time and do, but it has no basis on any kind of relevance for me. So I look, if their background is not something that is really going to translate over into my world, then why would I go spend the money to do that? Unless I'm just doing it as a vacation for fun, which is fine.
Okay. All right. Karl?
So I actually had to answer this question for myself the other day. I had a student in the armed teacher church security class. He said, I've got relatives in other Texas city a long way from me, and I'm trying to find someone to send them to for training. And sadly, there was no one on the Rangemaster instructor certified list anywhere close to this remote location. So I was stuck with searching the internet and looking what was available within 50 or even 100 miles of this remote location. And so I had to try to figure out who was good and who was not based on what was available from their internet information. And so the person that I ended up recommending to them was probably 75 miles from their location, but his website he was a law enforcement instructor. There were pictures of him in his regular patrol law enforcement uniform, but then there were pictures of him teaching regular earth people that it looked like they were gripping the gun properly. The information he provided about his background was fairly detailed. So he didn't make any audacious claims. And he was like, here's what I've done. Here's my experience. Here's my certifications. Here's the classes that I teach. It was all very well organized and very clear. And it appeared that he was in his lane and qualified to teach, regular people the sort of thing that they needed to learn. The people that were the main people that came up as in their local city was a couple of guys that they put their first names and their last initial, and they were former military. And the pictures were mostly of them all kitted up in military stuff, looked like, pictures that had been taken while they were on duty. But the information was fairly vague. Exactly what they did in the military wasn't explained. And they didn't put their full name out there. And all of those things to me are big red flags. That the other guy had pictures of him running classes, and he told you exactly what his name was and which agency he was with. And, you could do a public record search if you needed to know more, but he was totally open with, here's who I am and what I've done. And so, night and day, I said, drive the 75 miles to train with this other guy, because who knows what you're going to get with these two probably well-meaning people who've looked at too many YouTube celebrities who, they see businesses where people have code names and nicknames, and they don't use their real names. And I get that some of those guys do that for legit reasons, but it also it also lends this sort of, you can't look up my resume sort of thing, and I can tell you anything about my background, and you have to accept it or not. I like knowing, I like details, I like knowing what people have.
Right.
Uh,
And I would
and
agree a lot with that. Yeah.
preferably going back to the thing that Lee talked about, the instructor class that they spent all the time shooting standards. The class that I took recently was sort of the flip side of that, that there was lip service paid to, here is the national standard, here is the class standard, here is the top tier range Pokemon standard, but there was no pass fail on whether you could even shoot the national standard. And now granted, it was 107 on the range and people were not shooting their best, but there was no record keeping. There was no, well, you have to do this to pass at the instructor level out of this course. So there were literally people in there that, in my opinion, should never have the title instructor, because they really weren't, their level of shooting was below the what the instructor described as the national standard, which was like a 2-second draw and reasonable sort of B class par times for drills. And the same thing, I went to our state police academy and I got trained took a 3-day instructor class there. And we had instructor standards, but it consisted of shooting our state carry permit test again, and none of the shooting in the test related to the curriculum that we were taught to teach others. So we were going to be teaching people to draw from concealment and shoot at night, but none of the shooting standards for the course required us to demonstrate that we were capable of that. And unfortunately, in that class, everybody passed and everybody got certified, and maybe 5 of the 14 in the class exhibited actual competence at the skills that we were being certified to teach. And so at some point, there's got to be a balance in there that says, if I'm certifying you to teach this particular topic, you should demonstrate acceptable mastery of it to actually be an instructor. And that line, so many programs don't have it. They spend too much time one side or too much time on the other, and the balance is, I hate to sound like a fanboy, but Tom Gibbons does an excellent job in his Range Master instructor class of I think balancing that out, and very few other instructor programs that I've come across do.
I would agree.
Yeah.
And one of the things I've been in Range Master instructor classes where friends of mine have failed and not received their certificate. And it was very painful for me to have them go through that, but it's also important. You have to maintain standards. If you don't, then what are you certifying?
Well, and
You're
when
certifying
there's an
attendance.
instructor cert, they're going out to teach other people. And that means those other people's lives are literally in their hands. And if this means more than, just a hobby thing, that there's an awful lot of serious weight attached to what we're doing. And, not being well qualified to teach, it devalues, and it also floods the market with people that shouldn't be teaching, and makes it harder for people that have done the work to actually make a living at it. If everybody's offering $50, red dot classes, well, I'm certified by this person and this person, when it's an attendance grade, then I think there's a problem there.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things
Lee?
that is really common in the industry is, come take my class and I'll improve you. I'll take so much off of your draw. I'll do all this kind of stuff. Well, certainly you should get better after 2 days of constant practice and hopefully receiving coaching. You should be better at the end of 2 days of structured shooting than you were when you started. And so how much of that improvement that instructors are claiming credit for is just because the people knocked the rust off or they practiced versus what was actually being taught to them. I've mentioned the LSU class that I took a year or so ago, and numerous times. You know, that definition of learning has just struck with me as a persisting change in a knowledge, skill, and attitude. All right. It's great if we teach this class and at the end of the day, we spend a day or 2 days teaching you all these different things that we're going to test you for on the end of the class. And then you squeak by at a minimum level on the test at the end of the class. All right. Can we come back to you a month later and you still pass the standards? Okay. If we can, then you probably learned. If we didn't, you crammed for the test and passed, you didn't learn. You know, I did so well in college algebra that I exhibited the final, but I didn't learn any of that. I can't go back and just do it now. I crammed for each test.
Yeah,
Yeah,
one thing,
go ahead, Carl.
one thing that I really liked about the class that I just took was it did a very good job of providing students with homework. That the material was presented, it's like, you need to go practice this way, then you need to practice this way, you need to practice this thing and then that thing. And people that were paying attention, I don't think, let me take an aside. I went to a very famous elite 5-day school where I shot 2,500 plus rounds in 5 days. I did not get better. I didn't see anyone else that was there get better. I asked one of the assistant instructors, I said, what is the percentage change that you typically see during a week? And they said like 5%. And the frustrating thing was, it was simply, let's shoot the test. Let's shoot part of the test. Let's shoot something that looks like the test. Let's shoot the test again. And the people that were on the back 50% of the class, it was just demoralizing failure, and they weren't ever really taught how to succeed. And so you either came and you were good and it was a pat on the back, or it was an expensive, demoralizing waste of time and ammo. And so I don't tell people that, I don't promise that they're going to make dramatic changes. And this instructor I trained with recently didn't either. It was, here is how you practice. I'm going to show you how I practice. I'm going to show you how I develop these skills. If you're an instructor, use these methods to help your students develop the skills. And if you need to improve your skills yourself, here is the process to do that. All of that element of that class I thought was excellent. And probably the best thing about the class is even at my level, I got homework to take home. I got things that I'm going to go on the range and work on. And I believe that if I do those things, I will see improvement. And if I don't, it's not the fault of the 2-day class. It's my fault for not using that information that was given to me.
I'll echo one other thing. The class that I just took, again, was an optics instructor course.
Yeah.
Nothing specifically in the curriculum taught me anything new about teaching the optic that I didn't already know from any class. However, there was one drill that the instructor ran in this specific way that he ran the drill, not the drill itself, but the specific way in which he ran the drill, I thought was absolutely gold compared to and so I took this 2.5-day class that a lot of money and time for and everything, and coming away from that, because like I've got one student or two students really that I just can't wait to get on the range and try this with. And so to me, the class was a success for that reason alone.
Mm-hmm.
Not because I came out with their highest level patch.
Right.
It's because I learned something new about how to accomplish something that I wanted to learn. Other things that I did pick up along the way is because the guy that was leading the class was really good at trying to get feedback and involvement from the students that were taking this instructor level class. Okay, how would you teach this? Or Carl, how do you go about teaching this? Or Steve, do you know a better way? to teach this. And some of that conversation that got spurred from that, you know, jarred some thinking along the
Great.
lines. But, you know, like the whole, you know, most of the curriculum was designed around practicing for the standards.
Right.
And if that had been without the instructor, one of the things I told him in our final review was, you seem generally interested in the well-being of your students and that they are learning. And that you know, your attitude for how you ran this class made this class successful. You know, the curriculum, okay, but the attitude in which the way the guy ran it was good. And you know, I guess there's something to learn from that as well.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Karl, we'll start with you on this one. This comes from Christopher. What area of the training industry do you currently find the most frustrating?
I think that people base their choices all on social media. It's all about who's got the most YouTube followers, who's got the name, who you are, and your reputation now is almost totally based on how many followers you have online. And people that are good at that, or people that spend a lot of time on it, that's frustrating to me. I just want to teach. I didn't get into firearms training to be a marketing person. And so I think that in prior to the social media era, I think it was a little easier because there was less content out there. You picked up the gun magazines, and the editors and the gun writers would tell you who the great trainers were. And that was kind of the whole process. And granted, that was sort of a good old boys club. And to a certain degree, that disadvantaged certain trainers that were not of the right era or didn't have the right connections. But now we got the flip side, that literally anyone with a video camera and free time can create content and become immediately anointed a subject matter expert, having literally nothing more than being entertaining as their sole marketing point. And so I see some problems with that. And you know, I guess it's, you know, somebody say, well, you should just get better at marketing. Well, there's only 24 hours in the day, and you'll notice that a lot of guys that teach all the time, there's a few that are fantastic at integrating collection of social media video with their classes. But a lot of people that teach all the time, they don't have a lot of social media content because they're too busy actually working.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it sort of disadvantages people that are busy.
It's just like anyone today that's on Twitter can call themselves a journalist.
Correct.
All right, Lee?
Very much the same as Karl. There's quite a few guys out there and that have developed social media followings, and because of that, they are getting recognition in the marketplace that they probably otherwise wouldn't be getting. And I think a lot of that is built on a reliance on, or over emphasis on, metrics, because it looks good on Instagram, it looks good on YouTube, and we can tangibly show it, you know, on this timer and the scorecard at the end. And again, I'm not saying that those things don't have a place and that they are not important. But if I have to put on the scale mindset and metrics, I'm going to, you know, mindset's going to win. It's going to be where the emphasis should be. And I say that as someone who just flipped the switch and is sitting in my kitchen and putting out content.
Well, that's
that's
why
going to
I'm
get out
on
to
your podcast, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
right. You know, I know that this will go live on Monday morning, and by the time the following Monday rolls around, roughly 600 people will have listened to the audio content. Another 200 to 300 will have watched it on YouTube. And, you know, at the end of 30 days, those averages will be up, you know, higher than that. And quite frankly, folks, the podcast, since we started, has increased enrollment in my classes.
Yeah.
But the students that I'm getting are the students that I want. Because the people that listen to this podcast, I like I say, I want to stay in the deep end of the pool.
Yeah.
I don't ever want to have a social media thing to the point where I'm having to manage it or hire someone to sit there and watch the comments and stuff as they come in. But I do like the fact that we are reaching a thinking audience. And those are the people that I want to have in classes. And those are the people that are attracted to the content of the show and they come to my classes. So there is a benefit to it. But am I out there pushing YouTube videos that, at the range, shooting drill after drill after drill and posting them? And I watch those videos too. I can have entertainment. They can be fun.
See,
But
I
I
don't
do,
watch them. I don't
yeah.
watch them. I have no interest in that.
And that's this little segment right here has sparked a memory of going back to something on the whole red flag thing. It's one thing to have disagreement. We can differ on technique, we can differ on approach, we can differ on gear selection and the like. You might like M&P and I like Glock. That really doesn't matter. But there is some savagery out there, and there are a couple of instructors that take savagery to a level that I will never spend a dime with them, and I don't care how good they are. So that's one thing. If they are coming after people, just personally trying to burn them down and hurt them, both reputation wise, market wise, etc. Then you're not.
Controversy and clickbait gets eyeballs
Yeah.
and page views, and particularly amongst a certain sub demographic, the sort of young men with money and time that fill up a lot of shooting classes. If you look at the pictures, the class pictures of those instructors, you're going to see monotonous sameness in the dress code and the gear and the, there's a certain subset of the market, and in yet one of many career moves that have kept me from being in that club. I end up teaching 70-year-old people that want to protect their church on a Sunday morning, and they don't have a good holster, and you don't get a lot of good Instagram videos out of that. But at the end, I think that's doing more good for more people than some of these other things that are out there. I can't make videos of my force on force scenarios because I don't want students to have videos of them making use of force decisions that can be called up in court later. And so I don't have a whole big video library of showing what do I do in my force on force classes, because there's a whole lot of reasons I don't, related to legal liability and giving students the opportunity to fail and learn from that. And so, if I probably put together a bunch of fancy YouTube videos, maybe that would help with promoting the force on force classes, but I'm busy teaching all the time. So I guess it's a good problem to have.
With force on force, maybe do things like teach them not to let their buddy load their force on force gun for them before the scenario.
Oh, nobody would ever do that. Nobody would ever do that.
Nobody would set me up.
Yeah.
No.
Criminals steal guns that don't work all the time. That's where that came from. That you steal a gun from a guy and maybe the gun doesn't work,
Rubbin's racing, Steve.
Hey, it's okay. I'm over it mostly. So, but you brought up the force on force videos, which reminded me of another question from Jared. And I already have my own smart aleck answer to this one. Could a trainer affect you negatively in court? And the first thing I thought when I read that was, well, did you happen to ask him for a refund? Maybe that would affect how he would talk about you in court. But anyway, on a more serious note, could a trainer affect you negatively in court, or under what circumstances might that happen? Any thoughts on that, Lee?
Yes, I think that it could come back negatively to bite you. Well, one thing is the other side has to know that you took the training from the person or the other provider, and they would have to subpoena it and do all that kind of stuff. But I said earlier when I'm thinking about which instructors I'm going to take classes from or which one I'm going to avoid, sometimes their social media content and statements that they've made out there is like, I really don't want this played to the jury.
Yeah.
Um, I just, I know certain people are going to be upset over anything gun related, and it could be a completely innocuous video to us that are gun people, and we wouldn't see anything in it, but there's going to be somebody out there that watches it. He used a gun, and they're all upset. But if you have people that are basically in their videos that are trying to be on the extreme and trying to be on the edge to attract as part of their marketing, that could be a problem. And Carl's here, so we can go to a music analogy because Carl is a musician. Jason Aldean is a country singer that has released a song, try that in a small town. And the lyrics themselves are kind of vanilla, but the video that goes along with it kind of paints a different picture, and it's stirring up all kind of controversy, which means of course it's getting played because Jason Aldean has showed up in my Facebook feed the last 2 days more than he has ever the rest of the history combined. Now, funny aside, 1994ish, a friend of mine was hosting kind of an open mic cookout one night at his house, and I grew up in roughly the same area that Jason Aldean grew up in. His real name is Jason Williams, and I go to this open mic cookout thing because my friend invites me, and this teenage boy shows up with his mother driving him because he's not old enough to drive, and he gets up and plays a bunch of songs. It's like, hey guys, I got an album coming out. I'm 99% sure that was Jason Aldean. I'm almost certain that's who that was. But that song and the controversy that are going along with it and the video, he's going to make a lot of money off of that. That's going to drive a lot of, because the people that are going to get mad and that are going to hate it, we're going to go to Jason Aldean concerts and buy Jason Aldean t-shirts and everything anyway. So some instructors use those type of marketing materials, and it brings people to their classes. And if it's starting to get towards the inflammatory intentionally, if they're advocating any kind of like overthrow or that kind of thing, you're asking for trouble. And there's a couple of guys out there that do that, that on a personal level I know to be pretty good guys, but their marketing is to the point where I can't take a class from them.
Carl?
I'm in the same boat. I'm very careful about who I train with and what the backgrounds are and what the risks are. Because now it's not only effect on me, it's effect on everyone I've ever trained by guilt by association. And so I do my best to be careful, and I'm definitely err on the side of caution that I don't need to train with, somebody training me for the uprising to take to the streets and whatever. I think there's problems with all that. I know for a fact when one of my assistant instructors was involved in an incident that the police looked at everything in his social media because we had the file. We did get a copy of everything. They look at it. I was involved with briefly as considered to be an expert witness in a case where the client's social media postings were toxic and did not help his court case at all. And the lawyers knew this going in. And there's any number of cases like that where it's not just who you train with, but it's what you post online. And I think that's the part people don't necessarily think about is particularly if you end up trying to change jobs, that employers are going to look at all that stuff. So it's more than just who you train with. It's all the stuff you put out there that I think there's risk. Even as a guy that's self-employed in 2 different industries, Republicans buy shoes too, as Michael Jordan once said. And so I leave all that stuff out, and I generally don't put it online.
Well, I think, and I can think of something very innocuous, like, or at least you would think it was innocuous. Villa Rica, the police department just recently, Lee, there was a big issue where they posted pictures from training and they were using a single ILFE target for all of their shooters. And it happened to be the target was a black gentleman with a beanie cap, etc. And so there was 8 black guys lined up there that these police officers were shooting at. And now if it had been, Mohawk Mike with the white beater t-shirt, the white guy, probably wouldn't have been any controversy. Which got me thinking about should target companies think about how they package their targets?
I buy a wide variety, and I
Mhm.
joke with my students that I value diversity, but anytime we use those photographic targets, we use a different one for every lane. And then I actually have them change lanes, so they're not, one person isn't standing there shooting the same person target. We actually mix it up and put a lot of work into making sure that we have a wide variety of images, genders, ages, all of that. I buy multiple targets from multiple companies to get that diversity in terms of what you're looking at. I think that's important. And I'll throw out that if anyone from that police department had known anything about the history of firearms training, the reason the B-27 target isn't black anymore was why they make blue ones and green ones and different colored ones, is that same issue goes back to the 1960s, where the simplicity of printing a black silhouette on a piece of brown cardboard was controversial. And so whoever was in charge of that training didn't know enough about the history of any of this stuff to realize what they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes to one other thing to look at as far as this picking instructors and weeding them out. If they don't have or know anything about history beyond 2020 or prior to 2020, 2021, that's probably somebody you need to avoid. They don't have the depth of knowledge to be out there teaching what they're teaching. I don't care how good they are as far as a shooter goes.
Okay. Last question for this evening. We've been going about an hour and 12 minutes. We can go farther if you guys want to, but different standards for different gear, different standards for, one of the questions from Daniel was, he's heard some people suggest even different standards for irons versus optics, revolvers versus semi-auto. When, if ever, do you alter your standards for gear or dress? And let's start with Karl this time.
Well, all you have to do is go look up the different high hit factors for USPSA divisions on the same course of fire, or you look up the Steel Challenge records, and it's very obvious that carry optics, you put a red dot on the gun, you're going to gain 5 to maybe 10% in peak performance over irons on a wide variety of courses of fire. That the high hit factors for single stack shooting major are going to be lower than the guy shooting the polymer gun with the compensator and the red dot. Similarly, with revolvers, that the high hit factors for Grandmaster on revolver, whether it's USPSA or IDPA, we know what those numbers are. The numbers are out there. And yeah, absolutely. I would say even to the point that appendix carry versus strong side carry from concealment, there's a quarter-second time difference for most people, simply changing the position of the holster. That open carry from a battle belt gamer rig, different from open carry from a retention duty holster, different from drawing from concealment. And all of those things do make a difference. And I think that it's reasonable to consider those things when you're setting standards. One of the problems with the range Pokemon world we're in right now is I think maybe one person or two, I think it's Randy Harris and maybe John Hearn, were the only two that have earned a turbo pin from Gabe White drawing from strong side. And everybody else that's done it has done it from appendix. And that is simply because it is harder for the average person to be able to make the draw times. The 1 second draw time from inside the waistband strong side carry, and how you make that work is you can go outside the waistband and conceal that, and an open front Garmin. And there's all kinds of little nuances that if you look at what those two guys did, there were concessions made to speed. And so, yeah, absolutely, we can measure those things and we understand those things. And that's driving people, for example, to appendix carry because they were chasing the 1 second draw stroke, and whether that's maybe the best option for them for carry or not, because all the cool kids online are doing it, that is the dominant thing that I see now in classes.
So do you have different standards? So let's say, let's take the range master instructor certification standards, because those are the ones I'm most familiar with.
Right?
Do we change those standards because of this change in gear? Or do we have a different standard, a tougher standard if you're carrying a red dot? Or do we say, this is the standard you have to meet, I don't care what kind of gear you're running?
I think a lot of those standards are derived from situations and what Lee said, the application side of things more than the technical performance.
Correct.
Right. I think that's, and a lot of those, the courses, these strings of fire are long enough that the plus or minus quarter second on the draw time is sort of lost in the noise. You know, when it's 3 rounds in 6 seconds, draw time is not the issue. It's marksmanship that's the issue. Right. So I think those standards are okay. I think most law enforcement standards are okay. I don't think you're going to see law enforcement agencies making their standards higher now that many of them are transitioning to dots. They're just going to have more people qualify and meet the standards they already have, which is fine. And so I think you can get too far down in the noise when you're not trying to be at the top 5 or 10% of limits of human performance. That's really the only time all these little differences really matter. And so it's when you're talking about standards that are 75 to 80% of grandmaster level, those I don't think you need to make a bunch of changes to. But it is gear, appendix carry, and a red dot is going to make it easier for more people to meet those standards, because those two things speed up your draw time. And for people that learn to find the dot on the draw, it does help them at longer distance.
Okay. Lee?
I'm going to approach the question a little bit differently than Carl did, and then he may want to come back and address it from this standpoint when I'm done. I'm of the opinion that the problem doesn't change because of the gear you chose. And I'll give an example of that. The Bakersfield qual. If you look at how that's written up, if on the string 3, you draw, shoot 2, reload, shoot 2. And in that standard, you're shooting, if you're doing it with a semi-automatic pistol, you have 6 seconds allotted there before you start running into the time penalties. If you're shooting a revolver, you have 8 seconds before you start running into you're getting assessed time penalties. Well, to me, an empty revolver and an empty pistol are the same problem. The fact that I chose a revolver, which takes longer to reload, does not change the problem. So I don't think that I should get a time concession because I chose to carry a revolver instead of an automatic in that setting. You know, qual courses being revolver neutral. The world ain't revolver neutral. If I chose to run down to the little store near my house and I throw my J-frame in my pocket, I am not limiting the world to only letting one bad guy try to accost me and rob me. I'm going to have to solve the problem with the gear that I chose. So that's one of the things you start looking at. Oh, we're going to chase all these metrics. I know that if I switch to appendix carry, that I'm going to shave a quarter of a second off my times. Yeah, I know that I'm going to do that. I choose to continue right now, still carrying strong side hip because I still do uniform work. And that's where my gun's going to be in uniform. And I don't want to have my gun at different places. And I do experiment with appendix. I do it a lot of times with blue gun, practicing the technique so I can deal with it when it comes to students. I did the other day actually leave the house carrying appendix because I wanted to see what it was like to go all day in that setting, and actually found that I could do it comfortably because I've been playing on where I was carrying the gun. And I'm kind of looking forward to the day where okay, maybe I can kind of do this, because I don't have the whole work thing going along with it. I know part of the way that question was asked in the group was, what do you do if you're teaching a concealed carry class and somebody shows up with a battle belt? At that point in time, is it worth the fight in the class to try to get the student to change it? So I think you can look at it all based on context, but I still go back to the problem doesn't change because I chose to carry particular gear.
Mm-hmm.
But I also know, based on if I'm going to chase metrics, I know that I can game those and make it easier for me.
Give yourself the best chance to do it.
Yeah.
It's
The
the whole
argument that
battle.
always
Sorry, go ahead, Carl.
the argument that always comes in there is it's a slippery slope where you say, well, okay, you've got a 1.5 second draw. Well, what if you have a 1 second problem, right?
Yeah.
You can always,
Right.
Oh, well, that's why I need faster split times. That's why, everything's always, well, I can conceive of a situation. It's like golf, right? Until you're shooting 18 holes in one, then you haven't maxed out what
Right.
can be done. And the same thing with the shooting. You can always make the argument, well, what if that's not fast enough? And you can
Right.
go to your grave losing your mind worrying about what if that's not fast enough, because it's always possible that you could be the one person that needs the 1 second draw and the 0.15 splits and the 0.2 transitions to somehow get John Wick your way out of some insane situation. That goes into the whole long discussion of what is appropriate standards to train to and all that. But I do tell my students that have slow draws, I say that the bad guy is not going to wait for you. If your draw is 3.5 seconds, they're not going to say, well, I see you're having trouble getting your garment out of the way there. You're not getting a good grip on your gun. I'll just wait till you get your gun out. Or, oh, you've got your J-frame in your pocket. Oh, your hand is stuck in your pocket. Well, I won't shoot you until you get your gun out in the interest of fair play. That there's the application side of it. There are some time limits that probably need to be met to have reasonable chance for the application side. And I think the industry has that pretty well in hand, that not on the state concealed carry class side, but on a lot of the tactical defensive type shooting classes, if the standards are shot with gear they'll wear to dinner. Your answer about the battle belt is that's why I have loaner gear. It's like, what gun do you have? How about I loan you an inside the waistband holster and you untuck your t-shirt and let me teach you how to do this instead. Let me teach you what you came to learn. And yes, I know this is harder, but you'll learn more. And then anything I teach you, you can use on your battle belt, but you need to, if you're taking this to protect yourself when you go to dinner, then let me teach you how to do this right. And I generally get pretty good results with that. I had one student was like, I always open carry. I'm like, all right, but you don't wear your battle belt. No. Okay, well, put your holster on your regular clothes and at least let's practice. What do you wear to dinner? Let's train in that. And I did make success with that.
Yeah.
Do you get success all the time with that, Carl? Or is it like 90%?
I would say 95%. I've become fairly diplomatic. I made a bad mistake the other day in a class, and we had a basic 1 class, and there was a lady that had brought 3 guns that she wanted to shoot, and they were the guns that she owned, and they were all completely unsuitable for her. And I pushed the idea of her shooting our class guns, and my wife was assisting with the class, and she said the lady really wanted to shoot the guns that she had. And we had the conversation. It was like, well, she can't reach the trigger. The gun's too big for her hand. The trigger pull is more than the hand strength that she has. And I just didn't want her to suffer. I wanted her to learn how to shoot and then go back and apply that to her guns. But because of the length of the class, we probably should have made a bigger effort for us to do that and say, okay, now you need to shoot the guns that you brought, because the gear that she had, all 3 of the guns were just grossly unsuitable for her. They were terrible gear choices. Long, heavy triggers, balsa wood 38 with no sight, nub sights, and an old couple of double action, single action guns with decockers and long trigger reaches and fat grips, and literally the whole bingo card was full of every feature that can make shooting harder for her. These guns, everything she brought fell into that category. And I hate seeing students suffer. And I only have a few hours. It's like, let me teach you something. And then maybe you'll understand why the gear you have is no good.
Mm-hmm. Lee, you were going to say something?
I was just going to comment on the whole battle belt, the class I was in this past week. I was running out of a Safariland GLS on my belt because that's what I wear in the setting in which I work. As most of the other guys were running out of duty gear, and somebody did jokingly say something about my performance, and I was running slick, and I'm thinking, all right, my duty gear's out in the truck. Do I go out to the truck and get it and put it on? I'm actually going to be faster out of that than I am out of this particular holster, just to kind of deal with that whole ego issue in class. And I said, you know what, I'm just gonna stick and do what I've got here, because I want to get the reps out of what I'd actually be wearing in my most common office setting. But that
Well, then
does
that brings us to
bring.
what is really going to be our last question of the night. What kind of gear, how fancy should the gear that the instructor's using be? Do they use their Roland special with the rework trigger and the velocity reducer, aka the compensator?
I try not to.
Yeah.
I typically teach with whatever I was wearing the day before. Recently, because I had one for test evaluation, I was using a Taurus G3 as my class demo gun. I put 1,000 rounds through this Taurus G3 without cleaning it, no malfunctions, shot 4 USPSA matches, used it as my demo gun for a bunch of classes. And, basically to say, look, this is a $200 gun, and here's what I can do with it. If I can do that with this, you can do with your gear that's nicer than what I have. And I think there's value in that.
I think there's a lot of value in it as well. Everybody says, well, I'll shoot with their gun and show them I can do with their gun. That's fine. But if you had started off with a more basic gun, maybe you wouldn't have had to go through that extra trouble to show that student that you can shoot their gun just as well. I don't know.
I think that it depends on the context of the class. If I am teaching a bunch of entry level, housewives, licensed to carry type classes, students that are coming, and like Carl's guy that showed up with the high point and everything, I need to be shooting something that looks similar to what they would carry. It doesn't need to be a tricked out race pistol. I would also say that some of the people that focus heavily on the metrics, they also focus on that gear that is geared towards that metrics. And if you put them in a standard stock gun, they can't perform to the same level. I typically, if I get where I can start performing, I've got a particular Glock that you're familiar with, Steve, the Templar Custom gun that I did some things with. And I got to a point where I could do things with that pistol that I could not do with other pistols. So, okay, it's time to retire this and go back to a stock gun, because I need to be able to do what I can do with any gun that I pick up. And so to me, it is kind of a red flag, depending on the context of the students, the gear that the instructor is running. If everybody wants to be the cool guy and have the cool gun, I get it. But if your student base is someone who they barely scraped up the money to be able to buy a gun and come to your class, and then you're out there shooting a $2,500 setup, and if they start asking you about your gun compared to theirs, and they start equating that your performance is based on the gun, not your skill, are they going to then think, well, I can't afford that, so I won't be able to get the skill that I need? And I think that's something we have to keep in mind as instructors, depending on our context. Now, if it's the range master instructor reunion, nobody cares, because you're all, that's the different, the level of student. Although I will look at you with harsh judgment in my eyes if I see you running the Staccato XC with a high, expensive top end optic on it, and you have the grip safety taped down. I will look at you with grandma looks when you
Yeah.
disappointed grandma.
I know somebody out there is getting that message, and I'm glad it's not me.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's wrap this up. Lee, what have you got upcoming that you want to tell everybody about?
I have somewhere time at the end of September. I have a class in Cisco, Georgia, which is my trigger management class. Now, Cisco is up near Dalton, Georgia, which is near Chattanooga, Tennessee.
Right.
So in that greater metropolitan area, right now that class has 2 people signed up for it. We need some other people. I will be announcing a class shortly for the last weekend in October at Red Hill Range, and I'm not quite certain what it's going to be. I think I got what I'm going to do, but I got to talk with Tom Givens this weekend before I roll it out. And so be watching for that course announcement.
So folks, that class in Cisco is September 23rd, and I know that because that's my wife's birthday. So you heard he's only got 2 people signed up, so get out there and sign up for it. And then the one at the end of October will be announced shortly. Karl, you mentioned in our pre-show discussion, you've got a new, is it a new book or a new edition of a current
New
book?
edition of the old book. Let's see if it'll show. There we go. Nah, it's getting washed out by the
That's Strategies and Training.
there you go. Yeah, it's the 2023 edition. It's got like 50 new pages and bigger print and bigger graphics, and it's out there. And if you want an autographed copy, basically email me at rehn@krtraining.com. You send me $20 and we send you an autographed print copy signed by both authors. And there's a lot of new stuff in there. So if you like the old book, you'll like the new book. And a lot of stuff about instructors. Actually, there's a whole section on instructor credentials and my thoughts on all the different areas of expertise that an instructor can have, and which ones you can accrue through hard work, and which ones only can come from life experience that not every instructor gets.
Oh, good.
But other than that, we have classes at home every weekend from Labor Day through Halloween. Then we're a little quiet. We go quiet for deer season, but we've got some few classes coming up. And I'm hosting Greg Ellifritz in August. I'm hosting Caleb Causey in August. I'm traveling to Nebraska to teach a Force on Force weekend there in Firth, Nebraska. And we could sure use a couple more people to make that class a little more fun. We'd love to have some people come see me in Nebraska. And I'm not doing a lot of traveling this year. I've got a full plate of things happening at home. And so I am maybe trying to do a few more road trips in 2024. Is that what's coming up? 24? Yeah, that's the next year. Generally what we're doing is I'm teaching at home, and I'm teaching during the week, private lessons and private group classes. And I'm teaching classes every weekend, me and my staff.
Great. I don't know how many people listening know who Karl is. Hopefully the audience is growing. Karl's an excellent instructor. Your Force on Force class will be similar to what we did in Georgia a few years ago.
Yeah, the same thing. Friday will be all classroom theory. And then Saturday, the instructor trainees will be role players, students, exercise coordinators, scenario debriefers. They will do every aspect of it. Essentially, I'll teach the class and they'll work for me, but I'll rotate them in so they get hands-on training in how to run a Force on Force class. So they see how I do it and they get to practice doing it with me there to coach them. And then the Sunday class is a good old live fire advanced handgun, shoot as many rounds as you can stand in a day, advanced handgun class, because nobody will take the Force on Force, but at least maybe some people will come to the advanced handgun class, even though the Force on Force training is what people really need, way more than one more technical shooting course. But I got to pay the bills. So we'll do an advanced handgun course that has lots of metrics and lots of timers and lots of scorecards and targets and lots of all that kind of thing. And my version of technical skills tests and standards. So if you don't want
folks,
the Force on Force, come see me for that.
Yeah, go get your vegetables and your ice cream.
That's right.
All in one spot. All right, Lee, do you want to wrap it up or do you want me to close it?
Yeah, I'll wrap it up. And if you guys in the audience will bear with me, if I may say a couple more things about my father. I was early 20s, young adult, and we were all gathered up back over at my folks' house for something. And my grandmother was still alive at the time, his mother. And as you tend to do once you're grown, you sit around and you confess things that you got away with as you were a child growing up, things that you didn't get caught doing. And my father, he kind of leaned back, and I could see the thought going on his head, and he finally said, "All right, I'm going to line up all four of you tonight, and I'm going to give you one good whipping for everything that you did that you got away with that I didn't catch." And my father loved it when we could best him on something. And this is one of the times that I truly got him. And I just looked at him and said, "All right, Dad. All right, you go ahead and do that." I said, "But just as soon as you get done, I'm going to get Grandma. And you're going to get yours for everything that you missed." And he kind of called him a little bit, and he kind of leaned back, and you could see him thinking. He says, "Once you turn 50, you can't get whipped anymore." I'm like, "Well, we'll see if she plays by that rule." And so I didn't get the whipping that night that he was saying I was going to get. And that's always been one of my favorite memories of, just shutting him down like that. Um, Matt, I appreciate everyone who has reached out. Um, Steve, you coming to to the service meant a lot. Karl, you tell him that you played some songs in honor of him during your set the other night with all of the Georgia theme. I appreciate that. Everyone that has reached out, and I very much appreciate it. I'm doing okay. I still have my moments, but I'm doing okay. But I was struck by something, as we were leaving the church Tuesday. When my daddy was a little boy, his father got him an old mare that walked with a limp. So daddy named her Limp. And he rehabbed her and got her back into good working order. And one day he rode her over to his uncle's house, my Uncle Willie, and about 4 miles away. And Uncle Willie raced harness horses. And he had a colt that he was working with that was kind of wild, and they couldn't control him. And they had him scheduled to be gelded the next day. And Uncle Willie noticed that Daddy's mare Limp was in heat. And he told Daddy, "Go take your saddle off your horse, boy." And he turned that colt loose on Limp to have one good go around before the end came for him. And she caught and didn't call my grandfather and ask if it was okay or anything, just did it. And 11 months later, here comes a little filly. And my father named her Joy. And he raised her, and that was the horse he rode from the time he was 10, 11 years old until he was grown and left left home to go to college. And he always talked about her a lot. And then when I was in middle school, he gave me the choice of a horse or a three-wheeler, because I'm old enough, you could still get three-wheelers back then. And I chose a horse. And so we got back in the horses, and he ended up getting a mare, and he bred her to a friend of his stallion. And the day that filly was born was the same day he came home from the hospital from the incident where they told him he wouldn't live for another 10 years. And he's standing down there by the barn. He made Mama take him down. She put him in the car and drove him to the barn because he couldn't walk down there. And he got out and looked, and the mare had foaled. And he looked at this little filly, and he said, "That's my new Joy." He named her, and he raised her. She lived all of her days on that farm. She died in 2016. I'm okay, but I can't decide in my mind. I can't rectify it. Which Joy is he riding? And I keep going back and forth over that. I'm okay with everything else, but dadgummit, which one did he ride? I should have asked him. Of all the things I could go back and ask him, "All right, Pops, when it comes in, you go down, which one is going to be the one?" And so just for that, Daddy, I'll be there with you someday. Have old dust settled. When I get there, we'll go for another ride. Folks, your time. It's so important. Thank you for choosing to spend it with us.